Millionaire Groom mocked his fiancée's cheap wedding dress, but when she showed up at the altar, he couldn't believe his eyes. The soft glow of the crystal chandeliers reflected off the luxurious wedding gowns lined up on either side of the boutique. The scent of fresh roses filled the air, blending with the faint aroma of expensive fabric. Emma stood on the fitting platform, gazing at her reflection in the full-length mirror. The dress was simple yet elegant, a delicate Align gown with lace detailing and soft chiffon that cascaded down to the floor. It wasn't extravagant, but it was her dream dress, the one she had spent months saving up for, the one that felt like home. She turned, slightly admiring the way it hugged her figure just right. "It's perfect," she murmured, running her fingers over the lace sleeves. But the warmth in her chest vanished the moment the boutique door swung open. Emma Noah's deep voice echoed across the room. She turned, her heart skipping the beat, not from excitement, but from the sudden shift in tension. Noah Sterling, her fiancé, stood there in a tailored navy blue suit, the epitome of wealth and arrogance. His sharp blue eyes scanned the boutique lazily before landing on her, and then he laughed. "This is what you're wearing to our wedding." His voice dripped with amusement, his lips curling into a smirk. Emma's stomach twisted. She swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes, God, Emma," he interrupted, stepping closer as his gaze ran over the dress with blatant disapproval. "It looks so cheap." The words slapped her harder than a physical blow. Her cheeks burned as she clenched her hands into fists. "It's not cheap," she said softly. "I chose it because what it was on sale." Noah scoffed, shaking his head behind him. Two of his friend's men, who had never once looked at her as an equal, chuckled under their breath, and then, just when she thought it couldn't get worse, his mother walked in. Margaret Sterling was every bit the high society matriarch, graceful, poised, and utterly condescending. She took one glance at Emma and let out a soft, pitying sigh. "Oh, darling," she said, stepping forward. "Is that really the dress you want?" Emma's throat tightened. "Yes," she forced out. "I love it." Noah let out a dry chuckle. "Emma, be serious. You're about to marry into one of the wealthiest families in the country. Do you really think you can walk down the aisle in that thrift store-looking thing?" His friends laughed louder this time. Emma felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath her feet. She had always known she wasn't one of them, that she had come from a different world, one where money wasn't thrown around like confetti. But she had never felt the divide as painfully as she did now. Her fingers trembled slightly as she smoothed the fabric of her dress. "It's not about the price," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "This dress means something to me. It's the one I want to wear." Noah let out a mocking sigh, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Emma, listen, I'm not trying to be mean. I just expected more." His mother smiled knowingly, placing a hand on his arm. "Why don't we find something more fitting for you, dear? I know a designer in Paris who would be happy to make a custom gown, something worthy of the Sterling name." Emma's heart clenched. Worthy, as if she wasn't already, as if a dress determined whether or not she belonged. She looked at Noah, searching for something, anything that showed. He understood how much this hurt her, but all she found was his smug, unconcerned expression, like her feelings were nothing more than an afterthought. Something snapped inside her. She took a slow breath, then stepped off the fitting platform, her head held high. "Thank you for your offer," she said, calm but firm. "But I've already made my choice." She turned toward the mirror one last time, taking in the dress that represented everything she was. Then she looked at Noah, and one day she added quietly, "You'll realize what a mistake was to underestimate me." Noah arched a brow, amused. "We'll see about that." Emma said nothing more, but in her heart, she knew one thing: she would make sure he regretted every word. The more time Emma spent around Noah's family, the more she felt like an outsider. She had known from the beginning that the Sterlings were wealthy. Beyond imagination, she had prepared herself for differences in lifestyle expectations, even values, but she hadn't expected this. Not the cold glances, not the quiet, cutting remarks, not the way they spoke about her, as if she wasn't even in the room at every gathering, every dinner, every wedding preparation meeting. The message was clear: she didn't belong at a lavish engagement party thrown in their honor. Emma sat stiffly at Noah's side, trying her best to blend in. It didn't work, so Emma, one of Noah's friends, drawled, swirling his wine lazily. "Tell me, how does it feel to go from rags to riches overnight?" Laughter rippled around on the table. Emma forced a smile, gripping her champagne flute tighter. "I didn't fall into riches," she replied smoothly. "I fell in love." Another guest smirked. "Oh, honey, that's adorable. But let's be honest, do you really think Noah would have looked at you twice if you weren't stunning her stomach?" Twisted before she could respond, Margaret Sterling. Noah's mother leaned in, a delicate smile on her lips. "You must forgive them, dear," she said sweetly. "They just don't understand how untraditional this arrangement is." Emma turned to her untraditional. Margaret took a slow sip of her wine before placing the glass down with practiced elegance. "Well, Noah has always been expected to marry within our social circle. It's a bit of a shock for everyone, you see, this whole Cinderella thing." Emma's throat tightened. "I didn't realize love was limited to tax brackets," she said, keeping her voice even. Margaret chuckled, shaking her head. "Love is lovely, dear, here, but marriage is about partnerships, about compatibility." The implication was clear. She wasn't compatible with their world. She wasn't one of them, and she never would be. WB Emma turned to Noah, waiting for him to say something, anything to defend her. But he just smirked, taking another sip of his drink as if he found all of this amusing. Her heart sank. He had heard every single insult, every condescending remark, and yet he did. Nothing didn't stop them, didn't correct them, didn't stand up for her. It was as if he didn't see the problem at all, and that was when Emma began to wonder, had he ever truly loved her, or had she just been a novelty, a temporary thrill before he settled for someone more appropriate? The thought made her stomach churn, but she wouldn't let them see her break. Not here. Not now. So instead, she lifted her chin, smiled, and played along. She endured the rest of the evening with grace and poise, pretending their words didn't dig into her skin like knives, but deep inside something shifted, because for the first time, Emma wasn't just questioning the wedding. She was questioning everything, and one thing was certain: they would regret underestimating her. The world saw Emma as just another ordinary girl, a lucky woman who had somehow caught the attention of a millionaire. They assumed she was nothing special, just another outsider trying to claw her way into a world where she didn't belong. They were wrong. Emma wasn't just some small-town girl. She was a fashioned prodigy, a woman whose talent had once turned heads in the most prestigious design houses in Paris, Milan, and New York. A woman who had walked away from it all, and no one, not Noah, not his mother, not his shallow friends, had any idea who she truly was. Years ago, Emma's life had been very different. She had worked as a rising star in the fashion industry, designing breathtaking gowns for some of the most elite clientele in the world. Her name had been whispered in designer circles. Her sketches had graced the workrooms of renowned couture houses, and her future had been limitless until tragedy struck. Her mother had fallen gravely ill, and Emma had made the impossible choice. She had walked away from everything to be by her side, leaving behind her career, leaving behind the glitz, the glamour, the runway shows, the flashing cameras, because family had meant more to her than fame. And when her mother passed, Emma had never gone back. The industry moved on without her, and she had chosen a simpler life, a life away from the ruthless world of high fashion. Until this moment, the gown that Noah and his friends had mocked was not just any dress. It was her own creation, her most personal piece. A dress that embodied her mother's love, her passion, her artistry. She had spent months working on it in secret hand-sewing every intricate lace detail, ensuring that every stitch held meaning. She had poured her soul into it. And yet Noah had taken one look at it and laughed. He had called it cheap, not realizing that the woman he was about to marry was capable of creating masterpieces, not realizing that her work had once been sought after by royalty, by celebrities, by women who would have paid a fortune for just one of her designs. But she didn't tell him, she didn't tell anyone, because she didn't need to. She didn't need their validation. She didn't need to prove her herself. Instead, she decided to let them believe their own assumptions, let them look down on her. Because when the wedding day came, when she walked down that aisle, she would make sure they never forgot the moment they had underestimated her. She would show them who she really was, and by then, it would be too late. The grand cathedral was adorned with white roses and golden chandeliers, filled with some of the most powerful and influential people in the city. It was a wedding fit for royalty, or at least that was what Noah family had insisted on. Noah Sterling, the wealthy, handsome, and highly sought-after bachelor, stood at the altar, his expression neutral, almost bored. He adjusted the cuff of his designer suit, ignoring the murmurs of the crowd as they whispered among themselves. "I still can't believe he's marrying her. She's lucky. That's for sure. I heard her dress is cheap. Can't wait to see the disaster." Noah smirked slightly at that last comment. He was still thinking about the dress Emma had chosen, the one he had mocked just days before. He had half a mind to believe that his mother had convinced her to change it, because surely Emma wouldn't dare to wear that dress today, would she? Then, suddenly, the music shifted. The grand doors of the cathedral swung open and Emma stepped inside. The moment she appeared, the room fell into absolute silence. Every conversation, every breath vanished into thin air. Noah felt his own heartbeat falter. His smirk vanished because Emma, the woman he had doubted, mocked, underestimated, was unrecognizable. She wasn't just beautiful. She was breathtaking. Her wedding dress was not the cheap gown he had ridiculed. No, it was something entirely otherworldly. The fabric shimmered with an elegance beyond anything money could buy. The intricate lace melted into her skin like poetry, each detail painstakingly woven with artistry. The soft glow of the chandeliers caught the delicate embroidery, creating an ethereal effect, as if she were glowing from within. She looked like a queen. No, she looked like a goddess. And Noah wasn't the only one left in awe. The guests who had spent weeks gossiping about how ordinary she was were now speechless, who designed that someone whispered, "That's not an off-the-rack dress. That's a masterpiece. I've never seen anything like it." Noah's mother. Margaret gripped her pearls, her expression frozen in shock. Even Noah's closest friends, the ones who had laughed at Emma, now stared at her with sheer disbelief. But none of them were as shaken as Noah, because as Emma walked closer, he wasn't just struck by the dress. He was struck by her, by the way she held her head high with absolute confidence, by the way she owned every step, as if she belonged to no one but herself. This wasn't the timid girl he had dismissed. This wasn't the lucky fiancée marrying into wealth. This was a woman who knew her worth. And for the first time since he had met her, Noah felt afraid, because he realized in that very moment he had never truly seen her before, and now he was afraid it was too late. A murmur spread through the grand cathedral like a wildfire. Guests leaned toward one another, whispering in shock, eyes wide as they took in Emma's wedding gown. Where did she get that dress? I thought they said she bought something cheap. That fabric, that detail, it looks like a one-of-a-kind design among the sea of stunned faces. One man's reaction stood out more than the rest. Noah Ed uncomfortably adjusting the cuff of his suit, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The dress, the very one he had laughed at, was nothing short of a masterpiece. Something felt off, something wasn't adding up, and then no, it can't be. A voice rang out from the front row. Seated among the elite guests was Giovanni Duca, one of the most renowned fashion designers in the world. His name alone carried weight in the industry, and anything he touched turned to gold. He had remained silent throughout the ceremony until now. Now he was on his feet staring at Emma with the intensity of someone who had just uncovered a long-lost treasure. "This dress," he breathed, stepping forward. "This is an original original design." A collective gasp echoed through the room. Noah's stomach dropped what he blurted out, but Giovanni wasn't listening. He walked toward Emma, eyes filled with admiration. "I have seen thousands of gowns in my life, but this is beyond perfection. This is the work of a true artist." He turned to face the crowd. "This is no ordinary gown. This is a masterpiece crafted by a designer who understands elegance, grace, and storytelling through fabric." Then he looked back at Emma, his eyes narrowing with recognition. "Who made this dress?" Emma finally smiled, a small, knowing smile that sent shivers down Noah's spine. She took a deep breath, then turned to face the room. "I did." Silence, pure, unfiltered silence. Then the room erupted. Noah felt like the ground beneath him had vanished. "You made this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma turned to him, her eyes gleaming with something dangerous and triumphant. "Yes, Noah." She stepped closer. "You called my dress cheap. You mocked me. You let your friends and your mother belittle me without once standing up for me." Her voice didn't waver. "But what you didn't know is that I was never just some lucky girl who stumbled into your world." The weight of her words hit him like a freight train. Emma took a slow breath before delivering the final blow. "Before I left the industry, I was known as Laurent Noah's. Blood ran cold. Laurent the mysterious, legendary designer whose work had been sought after by royalty celebrities and fashion moguls. The same Laurent whose name had disappeared years ago, leaving the fashioned world in a state of confusion and lost his fiancée, the woman he had mocked, underestimated and treated like she was nothing, was one of the most brilliant minds in couture fashion, and he had never known gasps and murmurs filled the cathedral. Margaret Sterling's face had gone pale, her fingers gripping the edge of her chair. Noah's friends, who had spent weeks whispering about Emma behind her back, now looked anywhere but at her, clearly ashamed. Even Noah himself felt something he had never experienced before. Shame, deep, unshakable shame. He had spent so much time looking down on Emma, never once considering that she might be more than what he assumed, and now standing before him, she was everything he had never seen before. Strong. How brilliant, unapologetic, and worst of all, completely out of his league. Noah swallowed hard, Emma. But she wasn't finished. She turned, addressing the crowd with the confidence of a woman who had just reclaimed her power. "I may not have come for money," she said, "but I know my worth. And after today, so will you." Noah had never felt smaller in his entire life, and for the first time ever, he realized he might have just lost the best thing that had ever happened to him. Noah Sterling had always been a man who got what he wanted. He had wealth, power, and status, everything that made the world bow at his feet. But today, for the first time in his life, he was about to lose something he could never replace: someone, Emma. And it was entirely his fault. The grand cathedral, once filled with whispers of admiration, now stood in stunned silence. Every guest, every set of eyes, every breath in the room was fixed on Emma. She stood before Noah, radiant, unshaken, untouchable, and in her gaze he saw something that terrified him more than anything: indifference. It wasn't anger, it wasn't hurt, it was the look of a woman who had already let him go, and suddenly his chest tightened with panic. "Emma." He stepped forward, his voice quieter than it had ever been. She held up a hand. Stopped him cold. "Don't." The word was simple, but the weight behind it was everything. He swallowed hard. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice raw. "I didn't know that's the problem, Noah." Her voice was calm but unforgiving. "You never cared enough to know you saw what you wanted to see." And when I didn't fit into your world the way you expected, you mocked me, you let your family humiliate me, and you never once stood up for me." Her words cut deeper than any insult ever could because they were true. And for the first time, Noah couldn't argue his way out of it. He had been blind, he had been arrogant and now he was about to pay the price. Emma took a deep breath, then lifted her chin. "I will not marry you." Noah. The words hung in the air. Like thunder gasps rippled through the crowd. Margaret Sterling let out a strangled noise of shock and horror. The officiant who had been preparing to speak froze mid-sentence. Even Noah felt the air leave his lungs. What he whispered, Emma stepped closer, her gaze steady. "I deserve someone who saw my worth from the beginning." Not just when it became undeniable, she let the word settle before adding soft but firm, "and that person was never you." Noah's heart pounded. No. This wasn't how today was supposed to go. She was supposed to say, "I do." She was supposed to become his wife. But now he was losing her. And the worst part, she didn't even look back. Emma turned away, her steps slow and deliberate as she made her way down the aisle. Every eye followed her. Every whisper carried her name. "She's really leaving. Oh my God, this is legendary." She just humiliated the Sterlings in front of everyone. Noah wanted to call after her, wanted to beg her to stay, but he didn't, because deep down he knew she was already gone, and the only thing left for him to do was watch the best thing in his life walk away for the first time in his life. Noah Sterling was not the one in control. He had built his entire identity on wealth, power, and reputation, on being the man who always had the upper hand. But now he was the man. Everyone was laughing at, and worse, he was the man who had lost Emma. News of the disastrous wedding spread like wildfire. By the next morning, every major media outlet had picked up the story. Headlines blared across social media. "Runaway bride" or "Runaway victory, Emma Laurent leaves billionaire groom at the altar." Noah Sterling mocked his fiancée's dress. Turns out, she's a world-famous designer. Sterling hair humiliated as fiancé exposes his arrogance in front of hundreds. Noah watched as the world tore him apart. His company stock took a small but noticeable hit. Investors. Whispering about his lack of judgment, clients began second-guessing deals with a man who had been publicly exposed as a shallow, condescending fool. His so-called friends. They laughed behind his back. Even his own mother, Margaret Sterling, was furious. "You let her humiliate us," she hissed. "You should have controlled the situation before it got this far." But Noah knew the truth. There was no controlling Emma, and that was what made losing her hurt.